This is Dr. Mariah White, host of Your Life Matters. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Leadership Show, the place where leaders learn more about themselves and how they can shift the way they lead. Because when leaders get better, families get better, communities get better, and the world gets better. And now your host, Chief Leadership Officer of Shepherd Revolution, David Prosper.
If this is your first time listening to the Leadership Show, we want to personally welcome you. We started this podcast because too many of us have been hurt, underappreciated, and abused by unhealthy leaders. We believe that when leaders get better, families get better, communities get better, our workplace gets better, and ultimately our world gets better. We start all of our shows with the verse of the day, and we can find it in Romans 12, verse 2. Do not conform to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. When I read this verse, it stood out to me because I would often ask my mother, why don't I fit in? Why don't I fit in? And she said all the time that you were called to stand out. And she said, as a believer, you can't conform to this world. You have to be transformed, and you have to transform the minds of those around you. And it spoke a lot to me. And when we're getting transformed, when you think about transformation, like a caterpillar becoming a butterfly, it changes. So when we're being transformed, we're changing from one perspective to a different perspective. Again, Romans 12, verse 2. Do not conform to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Now, there are two kinds of leaders in our world: leaders who command and leaders who connect. I believe that transformation only happens when we apply learned information. Our shows are for working professionals, busy parents, on-the-go students, and aspiring leaders. Let's recap the previous episode. We talked about two kinds of leaders. There are self-serving leaders who operate from fear, pride, insecurities, and then there are servant leaders who practice selflessness and prepare tomorrow's leaders without intimidation because they know that their leadership season will eventually come to its end. Then we ask you this challenging question: are you a self-serving leader or are you a servant leader? Those are two powerful questions. And as we get into the show, I want to introduce my good friend, my teammate, the Kobe Bryant of Shepherd Revolution. We have Laura, who is just a phenomenal individual. I'm not going to introduce her. I'm going to let her introduce herself because I want to do it enough justice. So, Laura, please introduce yourself to our listeners.
Well, wow. Thank you so much for that introduction. David, you are such a good friend, and it's an honor to be here. So thank you for having me as a guest. I am Laura Swearingen. I am a coach, and I am the founder of Mirror's Edge, the co-founder of Gap Gators, and honored to be part of the Shepherd Revolution and helping transform and change lives. So thank you so much for having me on the show.
Thank you for being here. And I know we talked about the verse of the day earlier. What are your thoughts on Romans 12, verses 2?
Yeah, I think it's so true. I think, life and part of what we do is a constant transformation. It's a constant evolution of ourselves. And if we're willing to go there, if we're willing to look, stop, take time to reflect, look at ways that we can learn through every day, but also look at the environments and the people around us and know that regardless of whether it's somebody that we're leading or somebody that is leading us, we can learn. We can learn from everybody if we're willing to. And so really looking at, what are those ways that I can grow and expand my thinking, the way I think, what I think about, and then also what am I feeding my mind with and my life with, which ties into the heart, which I know you talked about on the last episode. And because really there's the Proverbs, all we do, guard your heart, for all we do flows from it. And honestly, I think a lot of the things that we see in this world and in leadership, it's a heart issue, which then feeds our mind, but then our mind also feeds our heart. So that's kind of it's like a interchange back and forth, and they're interconnected to one another.
That's powerful stuff. How the mind and the heart operates and communicates. And we talked about it in the last episode, so great job bringing it all back. And again, Romans 12 verses 2, that's a phenomenal verse. If you want to look that up, it is there in the Bible. And that's the ESV version, English Standard Version. So I have a question for you before we get started too. A couple of questions. Where did you learn leadership?
Yeah, so I was thinking about that. I've learned leadership just growing up and watching the people around me, my family, watching my grandmother be completely selfless. And I don't remember a whole lot, but my grandfather had ALS, and my grandmother took care of him for 20 years. Fed him, clothed him, bathed him, and she did it selflessly. She never complained. And then one of my aunts was developmentally disabled, and she took care of her with joy always. Wow. Always joy. The hardworking, my parents who were extremely hardworking, growing up on a farm, being around 4-H. I was learning leadership when I didn't even know that that's what I was learning. And then taking that into mentors that I've had in the different businesses and backgrounds and industries that I've been in, and then just feeding my life and my mind with people like John Maxwell, Napoleon Hill, Jack Canfield, Brian Tracy, and the list can go on, but feeding that. And I'm also a certified John Maxwell coach. So great person. And then the Bible and Jesus and the kind of man and the heart that he had for the people and how he loved unconditionally. Yes.
And nice plug. I don't know if you knew that was a plug, because we're doing a Lead Like Jesus series.
Nice.
All of those individuals, Napoleon Hill, John Maxwell, I say that John Maxwell is my personal mentor. He has no idea who I am. And one day when he listens to this podcast, he'll be like, oh, I influenced him. And earlier in our episode, we talked about how Jesus led. And Rick Warren, who was an author of The Purpose-Driven Life, talked about how Jesus had 2.1 billion followers. He has those, and we have just a little bit over 7.5 billion people. So if there's anybody to model leadership, it is Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. And he had all those followers, and yet he was the first to wash their feet. He was the first to love. He was the first to reach out his hand and help. And it didn't matter, back then there weren't cars and things, but it didn't matter where they lived. It didn't matter how they dressed. He loved people.
That's awesome. Yeah, he washed their feet, even though their feet, not feet. Even though they would go on those walks and they had those extra crusty crusts with the Jesus 2.0s. Those are sandals, if you didn't know. That's what it's called. So now I'm curious, what from all of the teachers that you've learned from, and your obsession and your drive with leadership and your love for leadership, what is your leadership point of view?
Yeah, so my leadership point of view in one word is influence. And then there at a deeper level, we are all leaders, whether we think we are or we're not, because every single day we come into contact with people. And so the question is, what kind of leader, what kind of influence and impact are you making on the lives of those around you? Are you making a negative impact, or are you edifying, building people up, bringing smiles to people's faces? Are you making a positive impact and bringing positive value or adding value to someone's life? Are you making their life better just because maybe you walk down the street and you smiled at them? It could be as simple as that.
The simplicity of smiling at somebody and letting them, that's making somebody's life better. So that's phenomenal. So today's show is going to be very different. I'm not going to talk about everything that I build into content, because today it's a special show, because Laura and I are going to be openly chatting about our perspective and on the mindset and the head of a servant leader. So let's jump right into it. You ready?
I'm ready.
All right, let's go. So what is the problem of our current leadership right now?
Ooh, how long do we have?
It's typically 30 minutes. But we'll see.
I'm joking. Honestly, like I said, I think a lot of what's going on that we see in today is a heart issue and lack of awareness. I mean, sometimes people don't know what they don't know, and for the majority of people are products of environment, and so they don't know what they don't know, and they only know what they know.
True.
And what they've been around or grown up in their experiences. And so, and a lot of it, I think, is false perception of what leadership is. False leadership is positional and power leadership and fear-based leadership. You know, shaming someone into action or intimidating them or manipulating them is not true leadership. And you may get results, but those results are not coming from a positive place.
I think you hit the nail on the head. The false leadership and the fear-based leadership. I believe that there are a lot of insecure leaders who have been wounded in their lives, and they have these wounds and their voids, and they haven't dealt with those. And I truly believe, like, if I can offer anything, if there's like, David, what would be one thing you would do about the leadership? All leaders need to go through therapy or coaching, because there are some things called barriers, habits, and hangups that when we are triggered, we go back to that default setting if we've been hurt in the past. And now it's more and more evident that we're seeing all of these leaders who've been wounded, and they're bleeding on people who've never cut them. And, one of the fruits of the Spirit is self-control. We're seeing a lot of leaders, lose control and let loose on people, and then sometimes don't even apologize. So that going on more and more affects, the family life, the communities, and it affects the children, and they think that this false leadership is the way to go, and they mimic it.
Yeah, I have a saying, don't hire a coach that doesn't have a coach, or multiple coaches, and don't hire, or even a counselor too, and don't hire a counselor who doesn't have a counselor, because the truth of it is we're all human, and we've all experienced trauma, whether it's type A trauma, not receiving the good things that we're supposed to receive, or type B trauma, which is receiving the bad things that we're not supposed to receive. And if we haven't dealt with that, then it manifests its way in unhealthy, immature ways. And then it's passing down, and it's continuing the cycle. So when an insecure leader then passes that down, especially with children and youth, they haven't developed reasoning skills to be able to analyze information and input. So most of their minds just accept it as truth versus being able to say, is that true? Is that false? Weighing the information. Do I agree with it? Do I not agree with it? And what do I do with this information? Do I accept it, reject it? How do I evaluate its validity and truth in my life? And children don't have that ability, especially when it comes from parents. And so that can manifest in unhealthy ways later on. And then the insecurities that play out. And the truth is we all have them. Yeah. It's what we do with it. And the awareness of when we're feeling something, do we project that onto other people? Do we project our fears, our insecurities? Or do we check ourselves, and do we have a healthy way of processing that and evaluating it so that we can overcome and grow from that and learn?
You said something powerful. You said we all have insecurities. It's how we deal with it. That's quotable. Quote that. And then 2, you kind of skipped over. You said type A and type B trauma. Could you elaborate a little bit about that?
Yeah, so they talk about it in the book called Living from the Heart That Jesus Gave You, and they talk about type A trauma. Type A trauma are not receiving the good things that we're supposed to receive, primarily from our parents, but that's bonding, that's connection, that's knowing that we're safe. It's learning how to come from negative emotions, because we all experience that. We all experience some sort of sadness, and learning how to come from that negative emotion to a positive, back to a positive emotion or a positive, healthy place in a healthy way. So learning how to deal with upset in a healthy way. Learning how, when things don't go our way, what do we do with that, and developing that muscle and that connection. And so there's a lot of things that daughters need to hear from their both mother and father, and sons need to hear from their mother and father. And when those things don't happen, or when needs are not met in a healthy way, it can develop in immature ways. Type B trauma, that's receiving the bad things, losses, abuse, hearing negative, shaming things that attack our identity. Comments of, you are bad, you are stupid. And Brene Brown talks a lot about that too, of you are versus what you're doing, the behavior, 2 very different things. And when you say you are either building up or tearing down someone's identity, which is so fragile, especially in children, or you're addressing the behavior and addressing guilt.
Mm-hmm.
Shame and guilt are two different things. And shame is honestly one of the leading things behind the epidemic of all addiction. And it's the shame cycle.
Wow. We just went down that rabbit hole really quickly, and I love it. So thank you so much for elaborating on the type A and the type B trauma, because I didn't know what that was, and I don't know if anyone else didn't know what it was. So what makes our belief system? So we talked about the problem, and we talked about how the heart is connected to the mind, but what shapes our belief system?
Yeah, I mean, our belief system, first as children, it starts from our parents and what we're taught. You know, we look at and mimic the people, the most influential people in front of us, and those are either our parents or our guardians. It can be grandparents, aunts and uncles, siblings, but it really is shaped initially by our environment. Mm-hmm. And then it's shaped by things that we read, what we hear, what we listen to, which has completely changed. I mean, I'm watching my niece and nephew and the things that they're doing, and I didn't play video games when I was 12. I don't even know if we had, well, I think we maybe had like Nintendo, but
I think you're dating yourself now.
Hey, now I'm not that old, but I can't quite remember. But we were out I was out riding horses. I was out, I knew how to ride a 4-wheeler before I was 10. So our environment shapes our beliefs. The things we feed our mind with shape our beliefs, the things that we hear. And then our beliefs get shaped by experiences. We can be told something and maybe we don't quite know, but then another thing happens and it reinforces that, whether it's truth or a lie, it reinforces that. So it could be as simple as, I made a mistake, and because of how I was treated, I'm bad, or you learn to not step out. Maybe I spoke up and it was rejected and it wasn't well received. So then someone may internalize that as I shouldn't, speak my voice. Mm-hmm. So we learn things differently through positive and negative experiences throughout life. And unless we're willing to dig in and grow in awareness and seek out our own truth and finding the truth and actually critically think and not just accept everything that's out there on social media, the news, and actually go and find the truth, then your belief system is shaped by what you're willing to accept.
Your belief system is what you're willing to accept. That's powerful. I have nothing to add to that point because you hit all of it on the head. So phenomenal. And you talked about John Maxwell a little bit earlier, and then you talked about how your leadership perspective. What is servant leadership to you? Because you talked about Jesus too. Mm-hmm. Jesus modeled that, and he washed your feet, and we talked about his washing the disciples' crusty crust. Jesus modeled servant leadership, and what is servant leadership to you?
Servant leadership, it's a lot of different things, but it first starts with love, loving people, taking the time to slow down and stop. And if you ask someone how they are, really listen to them, really look at them, really pay attention to what they're not saying, because I'll tell you, eyes, facial expressions, everything will tell you much more than what their words will say. And you and I we're great at talking about that as far as, no, really, how are you? Yep. If I ask that question, I really mean, how are you? I want to know. And that can be a scary thing. I mean, vulnerability and courage is something that isn't really always promoted, but it's a huge thing. But that's what creates true connection. Mm-hmm. And that's what we are designed for. We're designed for true, authentic connection, but it's also what most people fear. And so I think servant leadership starts by really, really listening, really hearing, and taking a step out of your own self and putting yourself in the shoes and really trying to see things from the perspective of the people around you, the people that you're leading. What are they experiencing? What are they going through? And it not just be about your business or them being a team member or whatnot. It's what else is going on in their life, because every part of our life is interconnected. Mm-hmm. So it's caring, adding value to them, caring about them, putting them first above your goals, your initiatives, your organization, putting them first. Because when you put them first and you bring value into their lives and you genuinely care, they're gonna do anything for you. In a positive way. Like, mm-hmm. Your team members, when they know you care, if something's going on and they need to work late one night, they'll probably do it willingly because they know you have their back. The servant leader is going before them. A servant leader is being a warrior, and the blame stops with you. You don't pass the blame. You don't point the finger. You take responsibility for what's going on, and you resolve it. You find solutions. A servant leader is bringing people into your world and empowering them, giving them opportunities to shine, give them opportunities to learn and grow, even though they may not be ready for that position yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's thinking about others more, or not thinking about ourselves more. I butcher this every time. It's not thinking less about ourselves, but thinking about ourselves less and others more. Mm-hmm. And Jim Rohn talks about this all the time, that if you help enough people get what they want, you eventually get what you want. And it's not from a place of selfish motives of how can this serve me, but how can I serve them? And it's, like you hit a lot of that as far as serving them, thinking of their needs. And when their needs are met, then thinking about our needs. I think the greatest leaders, servant leaders, are a lot of mothers. Not every mother, but a lot of mothers are great servant leaders. Because if you think about it, they're not thinking about themselves. They lose sleep. So to all the moms out there, you are a servant leader. Yeah. Great job. Great job. So that is phenomenal.
And if you think about, the sacrificial, are you willing to give a life for your brother? Are you willing to give your life? And our warriors, our veterans, our active military, they go into battle every day for someone that they maybe know or don't know or know well, but they protect the people around them, but they're also fighting for our freedom. And so servant leadership is also going above and beyond, even when maybe you're not called to, but you're doing it because it's the right thing to do. And I just lost my thought.
No, that's great. And today is Veterans Day. So for all of those military, Air Force, all of our armed forces, we want to say thank you for your service and thank you for practicing selfless leaders so that we may have this opportunity to talk on a podcast openly about Jesus and not fear religious persecution. So that is phenomenal. Yes. Now, you're welcome. Now I'm curious, is servant leadership people-pleasing or empowering people?
No, it's empowering people. And in fact, poor leadership, positional, empower leadership, fear-based, intimidating type of leaderships actually spur the unhealthy performance-driven place and the feeling like you have to please someone. And that's not a healthy place to be. Mm-hmm. You don't want someone to try and please everybody, but it's serving, it's empowering, it's edifying and lifting up and helping equip people to function and be the best version of themselves within their strengths. It's helping really someone maybe identify their strength in that. But it's not about pleasing and being a yes person. It is about empowering others, but it's also about having healthy communication, being able to talk about tough stuff. And you're not always going to agree, or you might disagree on some things, and that's okay. But how do you have constructive conversations around that is edifying to be able to move forward and reach solutions? And leaders help facilitate that.
You are completely right. And my family knows how much I hate gray spaces. And gray spaces is where we're not talking about something that we all know what's going on. And like I told my older son, having difficult conversation leads to deeper relationships. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's necessary. But like you said, communication is key. And how I see communication, it is the bridge that connects one person to another if it's healthy. But if it's unhealthy, it becomes the islands that separate people from one another. So again, servant leadership is not people-pleasing. It is empowering people. So I'm glad that we both agree on that. So I know we talked about servant leadership. Let's take a pivot and talk about let's talk about vision. And how does one make a vision become a reality?
Yeah, so and I think it all ties together when you think about how to be a servant leader. And if you're being a servant leader, you're being a leader of significance, and you're living a life of significance, which is helping other people achieve their goals, their dreams, which is about empowering them and lifting them up so they're in a position to do that. But in order to do that, you have to have vision. You have to know where you're going. You have to be able to help because all of us have different strengths too. Some people can see vision. Some people need help with that. But if you have a team that you're leading, you have to be able to cast that vision and be able to articulate that so that they have a clear understanding. And part of that is helping them understand and connecting the future with the past to know where they're going. And so also helping them see how they are a part of that, how they contribute, how they matter, how what they're doing impacts, and how they can make a difference, and being able to really help people see that. And vision, though, we can have different visions that are tied into our purpose and our why of what we're doing. We can have different visions depending on different parts of life, but within an organization or a team, or even your own personal life, just taking the time to really be creative and really get clear on what do you want to do and where do you want to go. Now, sometimes the vehicle of how you accomplish the vision can be different, and being open-handed with that, because sometimes we make one plan and God says, no, this is where I want you. But overall, being really clear on your why and the vision of where you're going, what you're wanting to do, what you're wanting to accomplish. And that ties into being able to have what John Maxwell talks a lot about, a big picture and thinking, and having big picture thinking is taking the time to really focus, taking the time to be creative, taking the time to learn constantly and every day, saying, what can I learn today? What do I still need to learn? Taking in different insights and perspectives, critically thinking about things, and then also really putting yourself in other people's shoes and trying to get different insights in that, so that you have a clear way, because sometimes we get so focused on the right now and the minutia and the details that we miss the bigger picture. We don't see what's possible, or something happens and we get into fear-based mode or scarcity mindset, or we get into the mode of putting out fires, and all of a sudden we've missed the bigger picture. But if we can keep sight of the big picture and the vision and the why, that helps us see what's possible. It helps us see potential bridges that can get us across the seemingly impossible. It helps move us forward, and it helps, we all have challenges. Nothing happens. Success does not happen by accident. It is all, and I know some people think it happens overnight. It does not. But it helps us really get through those tough days and being able to have that. And when people around you know your vision and you're so clear on that and you've been able to share that, they can help lift you up. They can help encourage you during those tough times. You can reach out and be like, hey, I'm having a really bad day and this is really hard stuff. Can you, what are you seeing that I don't see? And they can help you with that.
That's powerful when you know your vision so clear that the people around you can help you. And how I see it, I remember playing football in college and a little professional, that our coach had a vision of winning a championship. And we couldn't see it in the first 2 days. And what happened is he would go out and recruit the personnel in order to make this vision become a reality. And he would find the skill players and he would put them where their strengths were. And as we think about our body, right, we need our hand, we need our eyes, we need our ears, we need all of these things in order to do what we want to do in our lives. And there's those who don't have the luxury of that stuff. So I'm understanding of that. And when we talk about team, we have to have the right personnel, and we have to continue to cast the vision. And Jesus constantly casted the vision to his disciple. He would say, the kingdom of heaven is like, and he would says, he would use parables. He would use real stuff. He was in a boat and he was like, you of little faith. He was constantly painting the picture. And I think when we can paint a clear picture, then we have a clear vision of what the future is like. And he would also say, I remember this verse, what is it worth a man to gain the entire world and lose his soul? He was talking about eternal things when we're talking about temporary things. So the vision is constantly looking to the future of what it could be versus what it is. And Martin Luther King was phenomenal at casting vision. I have a dream, right? So speaking about vision, what makes a compelling vision?
Well, and so real fast before I get into that, when you really look at, if you know the vision and where you're going and you can help paint that picture for your team, then it helps them to know, okay, what I do right now matters. But also, what is it that I can do to get to there? And sometimes when, like with a startup or something like that, or a brand new goal, you're like, man, it's easy to go in that I don't have this, but it's more empowering to be like, okay, what do I have? Who do I know? What can we do? What are the steps that we can start taking right now? And it's a lot easier when you know where you're going. And granted, you can make course adjustments along the way. Pilots and captains of ships do it all the time. Mm-hmm. But when you know the ultimate end vision, it's really easy to work backwards and figure out, okay, what are those things that I need to do? What are the things I need to do today, next week, on a monthly, daily, weekly, monthly basis to get there? Mm-hmm. And it helps you kind of fill in the pieces and know when something's for it and not for it. So it makes it easier to say yes and no to things as well, of what helps build that vision. And then the compelling vision, pictures. Our minds think, for most of us, our minds think in pictures. And so really being able to draw that out, I think really helping people to understand what the vision overall is doing, what it means, how is it serving them, how is it impacting them, what's the difference it's going to make, and how they all play a part in that. Mm-hmm. And that's, if you're looking at team and that, but you can have a vision and cast that vision for your family, for your kids. And, how do we celebrate the milestones along the way? I think that's the other thing of how do we celebrate the milestones along the way? How do we do this? And knowing that building the initial vision, that kind of will evolve. And once you get to that milestone, it might grow even bigger. Ideas may come in, and being willing to, when you have people around you, letting them make an input in that of, hey, did you think about this? Or here's an idea of how we can come together. And I believe collaboration is a beautiful thing.
Yes, collaboration. And I'm right there in agreement with you as far as the collaboration in the vision, bringing people together. More specifically, the buy-in of the people that, like if you're running a team, mm-hmm. It's a collective vision. When Jesus was leading, he had 12 disciples. 11 of them had the collective vision. The other one had a different prerogative, and he had to fulfill that part of the scripture. But a united vision allows that vision to actually come mm-hmm. into reality. And I think that's powerful. So let's take a pivot here. So we talked about servant leadership. We talked about vision. We talked about belief system. Now let's talk about egos. Our ego, and how that can be a barrier to not just creating that compelling vision, but prohibiting others to see that vision. Like, what are some ego things that we deal with, or some stuff that you've dealt with as a leader?
Yeah, I think a lot with that are fears and insecurities, and they manifest themselves in different ways. Closed-mindedness, the saying, well, this is the way we've always done it, or continuing saying, yes, I want to change and I want to grow, but then not being willing to take action on that. And that it can be different for everybody, the reasons why. Mm-hmm. But I think it can really hinder an organization. The competitive mindset, especially within organizations, they call it the silo effect, where different departments, it's almost like they're in competition with each other versus really working collectively together. But not being willing to share ideas, or you share an idea and someone takes it and they run with it, and that gets in the way. Poor communication, I think, breaks down a lot of the ego. And I think a lot of it at the root core is either fear, insecurities. It could be lies that have been told to ourselves that are playing in either someone's mind or our own mind of, do I have what it takes? Am I good enough? Mm-hmm. Is what I'm doing really of value? What will people think of me? What if I offend somebody? Or when you're on the growth journey, sometimes the people around us aren't on that same growth journey. And so you might have the bucket of crabs effect. Mm-hmm. And so it can be a lot of different things. But I think the biggest thing is kind of that competitive scarcity mindset, which at the root is either fear, insecurity. And I think it's really sad because when that comes into play, people miss out on the beautiful thing of collaboration, the beautiful thing of masterminding, the beautiful thing of, and I'm a connector by nature, so I'm always seeing ways that different things connect and the synergies. But when people aren't open to that, they miss opportunities. They miss maybe someone that could really introduce them to someone else, or they miss being able to be a strategic partner with somebody. Versus when you come from a place of abundance and that belief that there's enough out there, there's plenty out there for all of us. And the really cool thing is a lot of business owners, even if you're in the same industry as them, if they're a really servant leader, they want to see you succeed too. Because especially people, if they're mentors or coaches, like, and even if they're not in their profession, but if they have that heart, they want to see other people succeed. And if they've been through the tough time and you're a startup, they know what it takes. They know all those different things. And then a lot of servant leaders are willing to share that wisdom so that maybe you can learn from them. That's the other thing. It prevents, I think the ego can get in the way of really learning because we're afraid to say we don't know. And that's a beautiful phrase that it's okay to say, I don't know. I don't know this, but I would like to learn. Or, you know what? I will do my best to find out the answer for you. I know in learning where to go to find that answer. And, you know, I think that those are some of the different things that get in the way.
For sure. You hit it all. Beautiful things. It's like you've read books on fear or something. I would add there's a fear of scarcity, like you mentioned, the fear of loss. I think now in our day and age, it's the fear of public failure. And we live in the social media world, and no one wants to fail publicly. And I remember I was talking to my wife and a couple of friends, and we talked about the experience of jumping out of an airplane. And at 15,000 feet, you know, you get up there and you realize this is the dumbest thing I've ever done. I'm about to die. And you get on the ledge, and then the instructor tells you, we're going to go on 3. And he says 3, or he says 1, 2, and then you jump. And then at that moment, you're just like, holy crap, I'm about to die. And then it gets exciting. You're just like, whoa, this is so fun. And then what happens is that parachute goes out, and then it allows you to glide. But I think when we have that fear of failing, fear of falling, fear of dying, fear of it's not going to work out, fear of success, then we can never experience, like you mentioned, seeing all of the beauty that is out there on the other side of our fears. And I think checking our ego constantly, because we all have ego, we all have pride, we all have fear, but it's constantly doing that heart check. Am I a self-serving leader, or am I a servant? Am I a self-serving leader, or am I a servant leader? And understanding the two is constantly checking our hearts.
Absolutely. And checking in with ourselves when we're in a conversation and you're talking about tough stuff and it's maybe not quite going, you know, being willing to say, you know what, can we take a pause here? Can we take a step back and reconvene at a later time? Because maybe there's something, and not being so committed to being right. Being right isn't really always, it's most of the time not the answer. And also not being committed to the make wrong. And so it's really being able to stay in tune with ourselves of what am I feeling? Where is that coming from? Because most of the time, the negative emotions that come up aren't necessarily about the present situation. A lot of times it's some of that, but it's something else from a past experience that's coming up and that's potentially creeping up. And then I think too, and this is probably another topic for another day, but the fear of success, which is an interesting one. And a lot of people think, oh, no, it's fear of failure. And Sarah Blakely has a clip about how she grew up that's really beautiful about failure. And John Maxwell, Failing Forward, is one of my favorite books. Love it. Fail forward, fail fast. But really the only real failure, and if we could create more of an environment of that in this world of the only real failure is not trying. Like we may not do it really well the first time, but at least we did it. At least we tried. And then we learned from it. So I think the only really failure is A, not trying, and B, not learning. Whether it's learning from our wins, I learned far more from my wins than I did my losses. And I learned a lot from my losses, but my dad was much harder on me when I won a class, when I was showing horses, than when I lost a class. And so I had to learn yeah, I won the class, but was that really the best quality, and how can I still grow? So he was much harder on me when I won than when I lost. But so learning and growing, like making sure that we're learning and growing, but just being willing to, you know, take in the account and being able to say, can we pause? If you're in conflict resolution, you're in a situation, being able to take a step back and check in with yourself and then come back to more, you know, from a different mindset, you know, and being able to be aware of what's going on within you and your thoughts versus just assuming that the other person is wrong or and then trying to take time to really put yourself in those and understand their perspective on a situation.
If you didn't know, now you know. And I just want to recap, and thank you so much for sharing that. Recap everything we talked about. It was very deep, and this is the beginning of many shows that I would love to have Laura on. We talked about vision casting and creating a compelling vision. We talked about our belief system. We talked about our egos, and we talked about servant leadership and how Jesus led, and how it is to have a heart of a servant, and how we should be practicing servanthood versus self-serving leadership, and how that affects just not us, but the people around us and our families. So that's all for today's episode. Please make sure you join us every other Wednesday of each month for a new episode. We're on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. Make sure you leave us a review so that this podcast can reach more leaders just like yourself. And I want you to remember something. If we as leaders are to set ourselves apart, we must start by leading through love, which always comes from the heart.
Thank you for joining us here at the Leader Shift Show. If you'd like access to additional resources and insight, text Leader Shift to 345-345 or visit theleadershiftshow.com. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please let us know and spread the word by giving us a review on iTunes. You can listen to our show on iTunes, Success Radio, Spotify, Google Play, and the IB Network on Spreaker.com. If you have a question for David, send it our way at prosper@shepherdrevolution.com. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time here on the Leader Shift Show.